Howdy y'all. Welcome back to Mage, the podcast.
Pull up a chair, get cozy, and maybe keep a notebook handy because today's episode is a doozy. We're sitting down with none other than Arden Leigh, chaos magician, singer-songwriter, teacher of transformation, and, you might want to sit down for this, official magical apprentice to Grant Morrison. Yeah, that Grant Morrison. Comics, sigils, and all. In this episode, Arden walks us through their magical journey, from casting the first sigil to literally having lunch with their magical idol. We'll talk about spell work, narrative sorcery, how magic plays out in role-playing games, and how sometimes your D&D character winds up married without your consent. You know, the usual. Fair warning, our audio had a little chaos magic of its own. My mic died, so I had to use the built-in mic in my laptop. Not ideal, but considering our guest, worth putting up with. So, grab a warm drink, maybe light a candle if you're feeling fancy, and join us for a chat that's equal parts inspiring, weird, and full of wisdom. Let's get to it. Howdy, Arden. Today, we're going to dive into the fascinating world of magic. What is it really? And where does magic culture stand these days? And how we can abuse that spark of magic into role-playing games like Magic: The Ascension. But before we dive headfirst into all of that, let's get to know you a little bit better. When did you first realize magic was something you could tap into yourself?
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And what a great question to start off with. I think for me, I moved to Los Angeles a little over a decade ago, and I already had some background in things like hypnosis and NLP. I was neuro-linguistic programming. I had earned my certifications in both those fields. And as you know, there's a lot of overlap between that field and magic. The idea that NLP is, quite literally using our language to change our thoughts, which changes our results. And magic being about putting belief and will and also ritual, and materia into practice in order to change our results. So there's overlap, even though they're not exactly the same things. But I first got into magic because, quite frankly, I was at the end of my rope in a lot of the ways that I was living my life and a lot of the sort of trauma imprinted patterns that I was under the spell of, so to speak, in my earlier part of my life. And so I really came to magic, honestly, because for everything that I was doing, I was not getting the results that I wanted in my life. I was still, getting these rather trauma imprinted results from my trauma imprinted patterns, going through the same sort of toxic cycles of relationships, etc. Not really able to find or create sustainable work. I could certainly channel my ADHD hyperfocus, my undiagnosed ADHD hyperfocus, at that point undiagnosed, into lots of projects and get success with them. But, nothing seemed to ever take off. I had not built a life for myself. So getting to a point in my own life where I was like, well, I can't keep going this way. Whatever I'm doing, it's clearly not working for me. So I need to try something different. So I moved out of New York, where I had been living pretty much my whole adult life at the time. And I moved to Los Angeles. And with that, I had an intention to resensitize and to sort of explore more of my right brain side, quite frankly, more of my feminine side, quote unquote. Because the East Coast and New York City in particular is just so masculine, or at least it was for me, so very logic oriented, so very bro-y in that way. And things like NLP and hypnosis were very acceptable in the circles I was running in, things like magic or witchcraft would have been considered like kind of embarrassingly girly in those circles. So yeah, and when you're hanging in those kind of circles, you want to be able to, now I wouldn't care, obviously. Now I'm like, are you kidding? My life is amazing. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get those results or whatever. But when you feel like you're conditioned, like you have to hang in certain ways or whatever, you learn to repress or dissociate from certain parts or aspects of yourself. And so I just hadn't allowed myself to really explore my feeling senses, my bodily sensitivity, and anything that would have been considered, quote unquote, girly and therefore, embarrassing to me or whatever if I was going to hang in that crowd. So I moved to LA And I was very lucky because there actually is there's plenty of crossover between the NLP and magic circles. And there were actually some guys at the time who started introducing me to the work of magicians like Grant, for example, Grant Morrison, who is now my mentor, is my teacher in magic. I am the sole apprentice to their magical lineage, which is an extraordinarily fortunate position to be in. So I move out to Los Angeles, and I watched Grant's disinformation talk long before I ever met them. I watched for anyone listening who hasn't listened to this talk, it is 45 minutes that took me at least 5 years to fully digest. And it absolutely changed my life and the way that I look at reality. So I watched Grant's talk on disinformation. You can find it on YouTube. You just type in Grant Morrison disinformation keynote. It's from the year 2000. And in that talk, Grant talked about sigil magic and this idea that you can take a sentence, quite literally a sentence, you write the sentence of what you want to come true, and you write it in the present tense like an affirmation as though it's happening already. And you follow this formula created by Austin Osman Spare, where you take the letters in that sentence and you reduce them down to a magical looking symbol, which is called a sigil, and you launch that. And then you kind of, you try your best to sort of forget about it. You figure, all right, well, now it's done. I can trust it's being taken care of. And one of the first sigils that I ever launched back in, coming up on a decade now, one of the first sigils that I ever launched was, I had watched Grant's talk, and Grant had even said in that talk, quite famously, don't just sit here, listen to my bullshit, and go home and say, we're the fucking counterculture. Do it, and we will change the world. So I was like, well, that seems sort of like a bit of a soft permission, right? I was like, well, what I want from my reality is I want to have lunch with Grant Morrison. So I cast a sigil and I said, I want to have lunch with Grant Morrison. And sure enough, about 10 months after that, I was introduced to Grant through a mutual friend, photographer, Alan Amato, who shot the artwork for the Arden and the Wolves EP. That's my band. I have a band called Arden and the Wolves. And he shot the artwork for my 2018 album, Who Can You Trust? And through that relationship, I ended up meeting Grant because Alan was like, oh yeah, I'm going out with Grant. And, I think he did, Grant identified as a he back then. I think he'd enjoy meeting you. You're actually interested in his occult work and not just the comics, So why don't you come to dinner with us? And sure enough, there I was 10 months later meeting Grant Morrison. And I kind of thought at the time, I was like, well, I said lunch in my sigil, but that counts, right?
Yeah.
But then 10 months after that, totally like you talk about forget about it. I was like, it happened, it's done. Like I'm happy. We had this great conversation. I got to tell Grant all what I thought about their work. But 10 months after that, Alan hits me up again. It's like, oh, hey, like Grant wants to holler at you. Can I give them your email? It's like, yeah, absolutely. So Grant hits me up, and it turns out that they're working on, at the time, this Wonder Woman comic. They were doing a 3-part series of Wonder Woman for DC, and they wanted to reincorporate some of the themes of bondage from the early like William Moulton Marston comics, and I had spent time as a dominatrix. I had also spent time in the pickup artist community, and also like learning hypnosis, like I had said, and kind of like where these things meet, where like pickup artist NLP language patterns cross over with psychological BDSM, psychological domination. And he decided that that the character of Dr. Psycho, this was going to be the villain in this second book of Wonder Woman, and that they wanted to bring in these tactics of NLP and psychological BDSM. And I was probably, like, without exaggeration, the most qualified person in the country to talk about that, considering I'd spent time on I'd spent 4 years as a professional dominatrix and also a full-time 24/7 lifestyle, submissive. I was trained in NLP. I was also a pickup artist, a dating coach back in the day. So where these things kind of intersected was exactly what my wheelhouse had been when I was in my 20s. So I wrote back and I was like, hey, yeah, I'd love to help consult for you on this or whatever. I'd be happy to have a conversation. Are you around? Like, do you want to like meet up or whatever? And Grant was like, well, I've got a flight back, tomorrow evening, but I'm free. They were in LA at the time. I'm free in the afternoon. Why don't we have lunch? So like when that happens, when you go from like watching a person on YouTube, and not having any connection to them whatsoever, and then you're like, well, I'm going to try this out, and then sure enough, about 20 months later, you end up actually having lunch with them. Like you kind of can't argue that anymore. Like at that point, if you're like, nah, it's probably not real, oh, this is coincidence or whatever, then that's just foolish on a person's part, I believe. And it was actually kind of funny because, of course, there I am sitting across from Grant, and I told them, I was like, I hope, by the way, that this is cool with you, because I may or may not have launched a sigil. And thankfully Grant was fine. But I was like, it's just lunch. I figured, the worst thing that could happen is you'd be bored for an hour. So, and it turned out we developed a really lovely friendship that has now turned into an official magician's apprenticeship. So that is my origin story in magic. When magic shows up for you that hard, like one of the first times that you use it, and all you have to do is be patient and allow it to unfold. Man, it's like I would be disrespectful at that point if I put it down and didn't practice it anymore,
If you were going to be a spokesperson for magic, I think you sold everybody there. Now, Grant Morrison, he looms large in my life. So. Oh, yeah. Well, so I wanted to ask you something. As long as we're talking about Grant Morrison, they've called you their magical heir. You're an apprentice. If you can go into it, and if not, I want to respect boundaries. But what does that mean, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to go into that. That's it's an extraordinary privilege to study with Grant. It was one of those things where we had a friendship and we were discussing magic already, and I kind of just wanted to put a formal spin on it. It was my idea, and to be fair, like Grant had basically said, like, hey, in exchange for consulting with me on Wonder Woman, I'd be happy to share with you whatever you want to learn about magic. So I was like, I mean, obviously, that was like, I'm not going to say no to that, of course. And we sort of, we would correspond, and we would sort of, every couple of months really write like a real long letter that, of course, then it would take the other one like a while to like read and respond to. And we sort of went back and forth like that. And after a while, I was like, if we're going to do this, I'd love to put a formal structure to this so that I can kind of like say that I'm your apprentice. And I was not even anticipating Grant being as generous as they have been with sort of formulating a curriculum and taking me through the things that they know. At the time, I was kind of thinking like, look, I want to get better at magic, so you could be like my Mr. Miyagi, and I'll wax your car, I'll paint your house, like whatever it is that I need to do to learn from you. Grant had asked me at one time to cast a spell to return their lost cat. That was the first spell that they ever asked me to cast on their behalf. And actually, the only spells that they've asked me to cast on their behalf, I believe, have been about the safety and safe return of their cats. And because they live in Scotland, and they have all indoor cats, outdoor cats, so many cats on their property, and one of their cats had gotten lost or run away, and they were really worried sick over it. So so they asked, hey, I don't think I have the non-attachment to this to properly cast this spell. Would you cast it for me? I said, yeah, absolutely, of course. Like, no pressure or anything, like, geez, but it worked, And so I was figuring, I'll just do more stuff like that. You can sort of tell me how to do it, and I'll assist you or whatever. And what ended up happening instead is Grant, like, upon the suggestion of the formal apprenticeship, Grant really put some thought into, well, if I'm going to pass down what I know about magic, what structure would I do that in? So it was actually an invitation for Grant to sort of say, if I am going to compile everything that I personally as a magician know or believe about magic into a sort of initiation to go through, what would that look like? So the arrangement we have, what it turned out to be more is that Grant is creating this structure for me to go through as a student, but I'm also going through it and responding to it. And eventually, hopefully, what it's going to be is sort of an epistolary curriculum where, and granted, we're not anywhere near done. We're going through the tree of life with, one Sephiroth at a time. And I'm right in the transition between Netzach and Tifereth. For those of you who are familiar with the Tree of Life, there's these, these spheres the magician's path that you go through. And it's just one model of many models of initiation. But for Grant, it's the one that they felt the most resonant with and that they chose. So for each sphere, that it started off much more like, okay, here's the exercises and do them. But honestly, like the tree has kind of taken over, I think, both our lives, and I think it already took over Grant's life before they started teaching me, but it's taken over in the sense that the external events of my life, even outside the apprenticeship, are now kind of lining up with these different themes of these different spheres. Certainly in this next transition anyway, in this last sphere, it really, it really synced up with my own life. So we're going through that, and we're, the formality that maybe we attempted in the beginning has kind of grown into this bizarre organic thing. But each sphere we discuss the themes, and Grant gives me some exercises to do, and then stuff shows up from my own life that clearly is in alignment with that. And they're very, very they're very freeform, and also letting, encouraging me to study other things that I study, or, study with other peers or take other courses. And then well, how does that relate back to what we're studying? And how is this useful? Whatever we're looking at, can we always look and say, what is the utility behind this, right? That's kind of the idea of chaos magic, is that there's no dogma. There is no one right way of doing things. There's all these different ways of doing things, and which of these ways are the most useful to us. So that's kind of the shape of it. But I'm looking forward to the day when we can put out quite literally a book that other folks can go through and sort of do those same exercises or ask those same questions and follow that same path. But yeah, it's going to be a lifelong project, I think. So I don't want to get anyone too excited about it, because it could be years, if not decades, before we're ready with that. But it's very exciting. It's a lot of fun.
I'm more excited about it. And when I was talking to Richard Metzger this morning, he told me that you and Grant are working a project together. So it sounds like this is a project he was mentioning.
That's quite possible. It's definitely more of an organic, I don't know, man. The book of all of this that we're doing, and it's highly unpredictable, especially lately. This last sphere of Netzach that I've been in, the challenges within my own life really showed up in this very Netzach quality. It's the transition from Hod, the previous sphere, which Hod is about information and learning and book learning and all the sort of information you can take in. And Netzach is the opposite of that. It's your right brain. It's your feeling. It's the sphere of beauty and emotion. It's where your nervous system is. And there's some challenges that showed up in my own life where it was so necessary that I learned to communicating with words in this situation was just not working. It had to be all nervous system. It had to be all body and feeling and creating safety and whatnot. So it's wild how that's happened. But yeah, it's an extraordinary process, and I'm looking forward to the day when I can share more about it. Although there's some stuff on their Substack, their Xanadoom account, which is their Substack, xanadoom.substack.com, I think is the URL for it. And it's a $10 a month subscription. And they write a whole lot about magic, and some about magic and comics, and, sort of retrospective of a lot of their work. And some of the stuff that we have done, some of the exercises that we've done together, Grant has pulled some essays or some, Q&As and stuff that they and I have done together and put it up there too. So yeah, so anyone who's interested in that, definitely check out their Substack too.
Yeah, I'll include that in the show notes. When I was talking to Richard, he could not stop singing your praises, but he also mentioned that you probably call yourself a chaos magician, not a witch, and that's an important distinction. So I was hoping you could explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Richard. That's an extraordinary compliment. Richard's just an extraordinary person, and I so love this project that he's put together, the Magic Show project. It's this remarkable docu-series. The Kickstarter for it is closed, but I'm looking forward to it coming out. That's going to be really fun. Yeah, I remember actually during that interview, my stance on that has changed a little bit. I now am much more accepting of the term. It's not that I wasn't accepting of the term witch before. I guess I'll just explain my feelings about it, which is kind of the question you asked.
Yeah, please do.
At that time, I was like, I consider myself a magical practitioner because the word witch has just become so sensational. And I think something to understand too is, I live in Los Angeles, and magic and witchcraft and the occult is very much part of the culture out here, which I love. It's so great to, have a dozen different botanicas, within driving distance to go and get lots of remarkable magic and witchy supplies. So I love that it's part of the culture out here. But what you often have is there is a very seductive path at the beginning of witchcraft that leads nowhere. So anyone who is looking to explore magic, I will just warn about this up front. There is a very seductive path, which basically, like, the minute you realize that either magic is real, or maybe you actually don't even realize that magic is real, but you realize that, like, calling yourself a witch and, lighting some candles and pretending that you're having an impact on the world, it feels good. And you start adopting this sort of like, well, I'm a badass witch, don't mess with me or whatever. But then what happens is this egoic identity that you create becomes so critical to your own self-soothing that you don't actually test for whether your stuff is working. You don't actually examine, because if you did, you'd have to admit, oh, I actually don't have any training. I might have some potential, but I'm nowhere near as badass as I thought I was. And then that doesn't make me feel very good, right? So you end up with, when you have a place that has a large culture of witchcraft, where it's quite common, you're going to end up getting a lot of identifications like that. And after a while, it was like, man, I don't want to call myself a witch anymore, because I see so many people around me who are like, don't mess with me, I'm a badass witch. But meanwhile, like, their lives are falling apart. So I was like, you know what? I practice magic. I'm a person who practices magic. And that's about as far as I need to, either my practice works or it doesn't, right? I'm not going to create this sort of egoic identity for myself. Not that there's certainly plenty of people who do identify as witches, who do have very strong practices. So it wasn't something that I was, judging in anyone else. It's just sort of, I was like, I want to avoid that egoic pathway. Either I have a practice and either my practice is effective or it's not. But more recently, as I've gotten more and more into certain occult circles, I've seen where there are folks who identify as witches because of a trait that is commonly known as witch blood. And it means that you are basically born with a certain magical gift. And there's a lot of really, man, I almost wish I hadn't gotten into this subject on this conversation. The scope of it is so enormous, and there's so much, it's such a hot topic in the occult community right now. Because the minute you say, like, oh, some people are born with it and some aren't or whatever, then you're going to get into people who are going to be like, well, I don't like that because that sounds like it's an argument for eugenics or whatnot, which I find really ironic, because most of the people who are born witch-blooded, according to the discourse that I understand, it's extremely common for us to be neurodivergent, for us to be born with disabilities, to basically be the people who historically, like, would have been eugenicized, right? So if anything, I'm like, man, it just sounds like you're, maybe you're upset that if we were in a more dominant position, we'd treat you the way that you historically treated us, by anyway. But basically, that there are different sort of phenotypes of witch blood, and there are different attendant historical and physical markers that come with them. And I was seeking out some information about basically some magic that I was doing around a certain sort of like crisis in my own life. And in order to seek that information, I had to go pretty deep into, basically some I feel like if I say I had to go pretty deep into some occult circles, that people are going to assume I'm out in LA, I'm talking the Illuminati. It's like, it's not like that. It's actually that, like, I needed to talk to a person who had actually, like, trained boots on the ground in Serbia, with people like who live in Serbia and practice Serbian folk magic and are, like, not available on the internet. And in that search, basically this person in Serbia kind of identified me as this particular phenotype of witch blood, and was like, I think that she might be a Vila. It's a kind of like Eastern European sort of like fairy or elf or wood nymph, and there's certain qualities, once again, these certain historical markers or traumas or or physical qualities that one is born with that demarcate this. And there were all these things that sort of matched up with my own experience. And then on top of that, the thing that awakens the Vila nature, the thing that, like, you must have this in your life, or you could have all these other markers and it doesn't matter. The thing that awakens the Vila nature is that a woman who is a Vila, at some point, usually when she is a young woman or even a young girl, she will have an experience where she attempts to be pretty at a boy. She attempts to flirt with a boy, and that boy will respond by striking her in the abdomen. And that creates this sort of wound where what she learns as a young girl is like, oh, opening myself up and showing my feelings to a man that I'm attracted to is dangerous to me. It is like, I can't convey that. I just have to try and be prettier and someone else will choose me, which leads to, like, all these toxic patterns, or can anyway. Like, there's a million, there's always infinite variations and people are going to respond in different ways, right? But in me anyway, this certainly leads to this pattern where you understand that, like, the world, the people of this world do not follow their own rules when it comes to love. Like, you try and be everything. You try and be, like, pretty and smart and kind and a great lover and a great cook and all of these things. But you don't realize, until you do finally sort of, like, awaken to the overall pattern of what's going on, that just, like, being better and being prettier and being more desirable is not actually earning you the love that you wanted, right? Which was exactly the patterns that I had been in my entire life until I moved to LA and, I kind of had my awakening and started practicing chaos magic and changing all my internal patterns and creating a repatterning project out of that. But before that, because when I was in second grade, I had been waiting in line for the bus, and I chose to bat my eyelashes at a boy named Justin Filomeno, and he responded by punching me in the stomach. So again, it's one of those things where I started out very skeptical about these things, but when you have that much evidence, I wasn't even looking for this. I wasn't one of those people who was like, oh, I want to find out where my witchy roots are. I'm like, I practice magic. It is what it is. I get a result from it. I don't need to identify as anything, whatever. But when all of those things line up, when you basically have these circumstances come through and you realize that all of the traits of this, of this witch blood phenotype line up with your history and also with your gifts. The reason that I chose to study with Grant, or was drawn to studying with Grant, is because Grant coined the term hypersigil. And then hypersigil is a way of saying that the story that you write or sing, or the poem that you write, the song that you write, whatever the work of art, the work of narrative art that you create, becomes a model for your reality and comes true. And Grant, as you probably know, discovered this when they were writing their comic series, The Invisibles. They put themselves in the comic. They had an avatar for themselves in the comic. And all of a sudden, they started noticing that what they were writing in the comic for this character was coming true for themselves on, like, say, a 3 to 6 month delay. And I had noticed this about my songwriting in particular. As I said, I have a band, Arden and the Wolves, and so I would sing things, and this is how I would work my magic. I would write, that's like, I do my sigils, and my full moon, new moon intentions, blah, blah, blah. But my most powerful part of magical technology for me, if I really need to hit it hard, I'm going to write a song and sing that song. And that's going to shift reality. So I find out about this magical phenotype, the Vila. Not only did she awakened into, her nature of like that's the curse, right? That is the stomach punch is the curse, and that gives you the patterns that force you into these like over analysis and perfectionism. It's exactly why I went into like pickup artistry, right? It's like if I can just say all the right words at all the right time and do all the right things and time everything out perfectly, then surely I will be loved, right? Which you overlearn that pattern, and that takes you so far from love, because you're never relaxed around a person. You're always thinking about the next move. You can't be present. You can't be intimate with them. You can't share with them the fact that you're plotting every single thing that you're doing, right? But on top of that, the Vila's most powerful form of magic, her gift, her magical gift, is that everything she sings comes true. And somehow I had found my way to Grant because Grant had created the Hypersigil, and that resonated with me because there I was practicing magic, and I would write my songs, and I would sing them, and the things that I was writing in my songs would come true. So nowadays, if someone says, "Do you identify as a witch?" It's like, well, I guess so. I can no longer deny that there actually is an inherent gift, right? Now, that doesn't make me better than anyone else, because it actually is about how you use that gift. And again, that gift also comes with a curse too. It comes with that trauma that is going to put you into those patterns. And if you don't take responsibility for yourself with that, then your life it's all about how you use it, right? There are plenty of people who are born with magical gifts, but who aren't channeling them in the right ways, which is where the Repatterning Project comes in, to tell you where to aim that focus and that energy. So I'm not trying to say that in any kind of superiority. And even someone who is not born with that gift, you can train it. You can be initiated into it. It's just like music. Someone can be born a musical prodigy, but a person who is just born with the drive and the dedication to study and practice can surpass a gifted person who doesn't practice as much. So I don't say that with any trace of superiority. I hope that's clear. But when all of those things line up and you have all of that evidence in front of you, what am I going to say? No, that must be a coincidence. Again, magic proves itself to me, and I just kind of go with it. So I guess, anyway, that's a long way of saying, yes, I'm a magical practitioner, but yeah, I guess I'm a witch after all.
All right, so we've been touching upon this across this interview, during this conversation we're having. So let's tackle the big one. In your view, What is magic?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like there are other people who have defined it better than me.
Yeah, but I want to hear from you.
Well, thank you. Honestly, for me, magic is the fact that I can do something and experience a change. And a magical practice is an ongoing dialogue of casting and receiving, right? So I do something, whether it's I light a candle or I change a thought in my mind. I do something on my end with the intention of creating a change. And then I see what happens. That's the receiving part. I cast, right? I send, and then I receive. The receiving is what happens after I do that. How long do I have to wait? When does it come through? And then that overall dialogue of casting and receiving, that is what it is, I believe, to live a magical life. So I hope that's a good definition.
I think that works. And this leads to my next question. It seems to me that the interest in magic, it waxes and wanes throughout the times. So
sure.
Right now in 2025, what do you think is the state of magic culture these days?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely grown along with the internet. When you think about it, if you think about how magic or learning anything was back in the 90s, my buddy Alexander Moore of Practical Occult likens it to learning guitar, right? If you were going to learn guitar in the 90s, you probably had to, if you were living in New York City, you'd go up to one of those flyers of Dan Smith will teach you guitar, and you'd tear off the number and you'd call. And then you'd have maybe, a 30-minute lesson once a week or so. But now, we have the internet. We have, a person, a Gen Z, person who grew up with the internet, could come home after school every day and have an infinite number of guitar tutorials at their fingertips. And maybe they still see that teacher once a week in person to correct their form or whatever, but it's so much more possible to learn things more quickly. And especially as Grant would call, the internet, our super cortex, right? Our it's like our global collective, our global spirit wants to communicate with each other. We want to form these connections with each other and fill in these empty spaces that until the last century, as communication and travel technology has advanced, we have been more separate from one another. But nowadays, quite literally, you have occultists who, for example, this is how I ended up forming that connection to the knowledge that I needed that came from that corner of the world in Serbia, is that a friend of mine went on the language learning app Interpals, which basically connects you with people around the world who are looking to learn each other's languages. And he spoke to a person in Serbia and said, hey, I will help you learn English, but I want you to go to the town witch. Every town has one. I know you know who she is. And the guy over in Serbia is like, yeah, actually. And my friend says, you don't need to believe in her. You don't need to believe in what she does or what she's doing. I just want to talk to her and I'll help you translate our conversations. So sure enough, he does that. And, a couple of months in, when they've developed enough trust between them, he flies over and stays at her house to learn that magic for a month and, cleans her house and mows her lawn, fixes her roof, etc. This is not something that we could have done before. So now you have teachers like Jason Miller, for example. Jason Miller, when he was a younger man, traveled all over the world, traveled to Nepal and traveled, and studied with all of these masters that you would not have been able to study with otherwise if you didn't have, the ability to travel and to connect like that with these teachers. And now Jason Miller makes these courses that, you can buy for a couple $100s, and you're getting all of that knowledge and information that he spent, decades traveling the world to learn. So you have everything, so much more available at your fingertips. And so the folks who are actually putting in the reps and training and practicing and doing this work in good faith, you have the ability to learn and study and train more efficiently than any other time in history. That is more available and more accessible to your average person than it has ever been before.
Absolutely remarkable.
Which is great, right? Like what it's like literally. And for as much as the world is also falling apart around us, what a time to be alive in both ways, right? There is also so much to be thankful for about the times that we live in. It means that it is more possible to change things, to learn things, to grow, to adapt, to source the information and the resources that you need. It's also tougher because it's more competitive, because there are more people doing it. So what you also have is you do have, things where this is bleeding out into the culture, and you will have people who either, don't go all the way with it because, again, like their ego pops up, or they don't want to admit to themselves how much they really do need to train or practice, or there's shadow work that comes up, or they get a little bit into it and they get scared of their power or whatnot. So what a lot of occultists that I know have been speaking about is that this year in particular, there's going to be a bifurcation. And this is not just for magic and occultists. I think this is for most people. There are the people who are going to be able to be resourceful and adaptable and who can learn and unlearn. What was that quote? Gosh, I don't remember who said it, but it was like the future is the future is going to belong to those who can, who can learn and unlearn, right? That sort of emotional or neuroplastic literacy is going to be the thing that is the greatest resource or skill set in the future. So I think magic is no different. We have more and more opportunity to learn things, and yet at the same time, it is more competitive. And doing, what a lot of magicians are finding is that their magic is working in much different ways than it used to. And it's no fault of their own. It's just the fact that there are more people competing for the same scarce resources. And also the fact that, like, in the old days, you'd do a lover drawing spell and you had a town of a few hundred or a few thousand people to choose from. Nowadays, you can do a lover drawing spell and it can bring you the perfect person from the other side of the world. And what that means is that may in practice look like gee, my lever drawing took me a year to actually come true. How come early, decades ago, people could do something and that person would show up in a week or two? Well, yeah, because you had a smaller pool to choose from. You actually had to wait longer for your spell to pop off, but you got a better person because you had a wider pool to select from. And your spirits decided, no, this other person is going to be worth the wait. So for a lot of people, it may feel like their magic is taking longer. It may feel like magic is slowing down. In reality, it's actually that there are so many more lines of connection that are opened up because of the way that our world is today. So yeah, it's interesting. There are things about it that are a lot speedier, and there are things about it that may feel a lot slower too. And more than ever, I think it's just important for people to really put their put their money where their mouth is, and to look very realistically at their results and say, am I actually training? Am I actually getting results from the things that I'm doing? Do I even know what that looks like to be successful in magic? Or am I just dressing up and making myself feel better? Because there certainly is that out there too.
Fascinating. I had never considered it that way before. And, this is leading to my next question. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is actually have a practitioner of magic give their input, give their viewpoint on how players and storytellers can bring magic into their games. And I feel during the course of our conversation, you've already done that. But let's hone in a little bit. So how can the game masters bring magic into the game from your vantage point?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, this actually, in my estimation, I think it actually may produce a conflict of interest. Part of me asks, if D&D or other role-playing games, I think something that is an important conversation in any kind of narrative magic is the fact that oftentimes we are doing magic to make our lives hopefully easier, hopefully more bearable, and a lot of storytelling exists around conflict, exists around things being interesting, right? We want to see the hero in the Invisibles, tied to the chair and, threatened with a flesh-eating bacteria and, and with a busted lung and whatnot. But when that ends up happening to the author, which it did to Grant, Grant ends up in the hospital with pneumonia several months after that issue had been written or had come out. And then in the hospital, contracts a staph infection literally on their face, exactly as the character had been put through, with a flesh-eating bacteria eating away at their face. Grant still has the scar from that, So my question would be, for something like a role-playing game, which again, I don't play the game Mage that's being featured on this podcast, but I do play Vampire the Masquerade with a small group of occultists. And part of my understanding about role-playing games is that people play them because they're unhinged, because anything could happen. My character in my game is now accidentally married to one of the other characters that she doesn't have feelings for, because there was some, or now she has feelings for her or something, because there was some weird bond that was triggered by something that we did in the game or whatever, and because for me it's just a game, I can be like, well, it's just a game, haha, that's funny, this is sort of the point of it. But for our magic, we really do want to I think anyway how much control can you have over magic? That is probably a fool's errand, but as much as possible, we want to write the thing that we want to come true. And RPGs are, I believe, the sort of the excitement in them comes from the fact that these are people gathering and the unexpected happens. And oh my gosh, how are we going to deal with this? Or how are we going to deal with that? Or however that ends up going. So I gotta say, if I'm gonna enchant an RPG character and say, this is my avatar and I'm putting her in this world and I'm going to link it to me so that these things happen, I kind of question, like, why would I put that in the hands of something that is so unpredictable and could potentially go so very wrong? I probably would want to be much more in control of that world. So I actually, like, part of me, my question would be more like, how do I play an RPG game and shield against it so that I make sure that I don't accidentally fall in love with my friend who's playing this other character that I'm now married to or whatnot? How do I set up a protection so that this doesn't transfer to me? That's, oh my gosh, you know what I mean?
I do actually. I have a good friend. He had never played a role-playing game before. I invited him to join, but one of his concerns was the potential psychic fallout from playing the game, which I had never thought of before.
Yeah, I guess I would ask a person wanting to do that, like, what is your goal with magic? And would it be better suited for a hypersigil in which you do have control? I do think that the narrative magic that is best suited for actually creating results in our lives is like hero's journeys based stuff. When we are saying, here's a journey I'm going to go on, here's a challenge that I'm going to tackle. I don't anticipate that this will be smooth sailing all the way. I don't anticipate that I'm just going to, be a Mary Sue, because that's not going to make for an interesting story. And that's also probably not the journey I'm going on. I anticipate that this journey is going to change me. But if I follow that sort of like hero's journey template, which for me is something that is very resonant in a lot of my work, what it means is that there is a built-in sort of story cycle for me to go in and defeat this challenge, whatever it is, to meet the mentor that I need, to gain the skills, to go through the tests and meet the allies and the enemies, and to transform myself, and then to go through the ordeal, and then to return with the elixir. And so if I use narrative magic for a challenge that I'm tackling like that I think is going to be very effective, because it's going to say, I am probably going to meet some ordeals along the way. I am going to experience conflict, but it's through this conflict that I'm going to grow and transform and become the hero. And if I follow this template, and if I do these things, and if I act like the hero, and if I show up with that main character energy in my life, and I don't back down from these challenges, and I don't let my ego get in the way of my legitimate practice, and I follow with the noble heart and courage of a hero, then I am going to emerge victorious. That's where I would most be likely to use narrative magic. But even that, I'm not going to lie, I probably wouldn't use it in an RPG game because there are so many other factors and variables and other people playing.
Before we wrap things up, I would love to hear about your repatterning project. It sounds intriguing.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. Yeah, the Repatterning Project came out of those first sigils that I was launching. Again, I wouldn't say that at the time I was aware of all the patterns that I was in, because I guess if you're aware of them, it's easier to change them. I really was stuck in this sort of if I am just more pleasing to people, if I'm just better, prettier, whatever, then surely my relationships will work out, and all the sort of attendant patterns that can roll off of that one of perfectionism and self-criticism and anxiety, right? All of that stuff. And so when I started doing magic, I was in many ways very lucky that I kind of, I was also, being in Los Angeles, I was also adjacent to a lot of sort of new age spiritual circles where it's all about, being your highest self and actualizing your potential and, blossoming into your awakening. So I kind of used that with some of my chaos magic and sigil magic. And all of those patterns started sort of showing up in ways that were apparent to me. And I received, through the magic I was doing, all of the information that I needed about trauma and addiction and attachment styles and all these ways that we learn. And the NLP that I had learned years ago, but maybe hadn't quite actualized because I didn't have the other missing pieces of information about the ways that I had been patterned, and learning basically that, okay, my mind-body system is my own domain. I may have had these traumas that I grew up with that imprinted these patterns in me. And it may be understandable why I am still acting out of them, because nobody taught me how to code my own system. Like, we are all systems and we are all programmers, but most of us never learned how to code. But by studying this information that my quite literally, the chaos magic sort of set up to bring my way so that I could understand it, I learned how to reprogram my own system. I said, all right, well, if my patterns are generating the results that I get in my life, and my patterns may have been set by my past, but I'm in the present and I'm capable of recoding them. If I can recode these patterns, then I can change my internal programming to generate the external results that I want in my life. So I learned how to do that. And the Repatterning Project is the 8-week course where I teach other people how to do that as well. So it is not overtly a magic course, although it'd be pretty silly for me at this point to try and hide the fact that I practice magic. It's obviously pretty everywhere. So I am open about that. But I don't want people to think that it's only for people who practice magic. You can enhance it with magic. You could start using chaos magic and sigil magic to change your patterns, and it will bring your results about more quickly. But the Repatterning Project is where we basically go through and we learn how our mind-body systems, our human computers, work to be programmed by our external experiences or whatever epigenetic patterns that we've also had passed down generationally. And it teaches us how to go in there and reprogram ourselves so that, again, we can generate the life that we actually want. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. People come out of it and it's a huge information download. It takes 8 weeks, and it's 8 weeks of weekly lectures and weekly group calls for processing, which we do in an intimate container, roughly usually about a dozen people. And the next one is starting on February 2nd. So I am enrolling for that now. But yeah, it's basically, people come out of it and they basically report they're like, 6 to 12 months later, their entire life has changed because they've gone through and they've assessed all their patterns. And then they take that space that they need to cocoon, and to reset. It takes that pause, but then they sort of emerge from that. And they're like, all of a sudden, all of the energy that I was giving to things that weren't going anywhere, to friendships that weren't reciprocal, to dead-end jobs, to things that just were not getting me the return that I kind of thought that they should. I put all of that energy into generating the things that I actually want. And now, oh my gosh, my life is in a totally different place. I'm making money doing things that I love instead of, slaving away at a day job that I didn't like anymore. My relationships have gotten better. Either I've moved on from my present partners because they couldn't grow with me, or my present partners actually stepped up when I stepped up and started, getting better about my own needs and boundaries, and they grew too. And now my relationships are so much better, et cetera. So it's really like, it's for people who, who know they're smart and who know that they are resilient and have probably, maybe been through a lot, but they're just like, why am I not getting the right results? And all it is you're maybe not putting the right variable into the equation. It has nothing to do with you or your worthiness or anything like that. It's just about, where are you putting that energy? What patterns do you have? What's the difference between you and someone who grew up with, some, really supportive entrepreneur dad who taught you how to start your first business when you were 13. Yeah, no wonder that 26-year-old is speaking on the stage of traffic and conversion and with her multi-million-dollar business, and you're not. You're still, in unsustainable work. Of course, because you grew up with trauma. It's not your fault. But guess what? Nobody's going to change your patterns but you. So here's how to do that. So that's what we do. It's a lot of fun.
You can't see this, but I'm holding up my hand. I'm going to tick this off on my fingers. All right. So you've got your apprenticeship with Grant Morrison. You've got your musical project, Arden the Wolves, and there's the Repatterning Project. Is there anything else exciting that you're working on right now that folks should know about?
Well, I do have an album coming out with Arden and the Wolves later this year. I don't have I have a projected release date of May, but that's based on divination because I'm still waiting for a couple elements to come through. So I'm excited about that. And that contains within itself a lot of really interesting magic, especially about repatterning. And repatterning is like repatterning from some really pretty intense cases that maybe couldn't have been done without magic or whatnot. So everything kind of is interconnected with those things. But yeah, I'm excited about that album to come out. It is called the Bourbon Room Sessions, and I'm hoping it's going to come out in May. But folks can follow along. I've got an account for my band Arden and the Wolves, where I also talk more about my sort of more overtly magical practices as well. So folks can certainly follow along there. But yeah, it's there's a lot on my plate. I'll say that much.
For sure.
And all other stuff I'm doing also is like, it's all sort of going to come back to all these these same things. I'm going to be launching my own podcast later this year. I've got a book in the works, stuff like that, but it's all related to the same projects. So I'm excited about it. Yeah.
All right, a lot on your plate. Where's the best spot online for people to keep up with you and your work?
Yeah, I've got Instagram is probably the place where I update the most. Facebook, but Facebook has so many issues. Who knows how long I'm going to be there. But yeah, Instagram, I'm at It's Me, Arden Leigh is my personal. And then, of course, I have Arden and the Wolves for my band, and the Repatterning Project for the Repatterning Project. So all three of those Instagram accounts, I post the relevant stuff there. And I've got stuff on YouTube as well. And so I can be found there. And yeah, I for sure, and also, of course, just if anyone is interested in the Repatterning Project course, that begins on February 2nd. And you can also find out more about that at therepatterningproject.com. I've got a bunch of testimonials up there too. A lot of the success stories from the folks who come back 6 to 12 months later with their lives changed. So folks can read about that there. Yeah, hopefully that's comprehensive.
I saw that. A lot of love up there. And thanks so much for spending time with us today, Arden, and sharing your insights into the world of magic. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was really fun to talk with you. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, folks, that just about wraps it up for this episode of Mage the Podcast. Big thanks again to Arden Leigh for sharing their magical journey with us. Sigils, spells, cats, comics, and all. It's not every day you get to hear a story that starts with a spell and ends with lunch with Grant Morrison. Now is it? If you enjoyed this chat, and how could you have not? You can find us creeping around the internet on all sorts of platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Mastodon, PixelFed, Threads, and yep, even YouTube, because the algorithm demands a blood sacrifice. Just search Mage the Podcast and we'll come trotting right up like an old friend. And if you're looking for more episodes, show notes, or just want to poke around and see what kind of trouble we're getting into, head on over to magethepodcast.com. That's the mothership, folks. This here episode wouldn't be half as shiny without the help of our executive producers. So I want to tip my hat and give them a big ol' thank you right now. Y'all sure do keep the lights on and keep the magic coming. So, special thanks to Oracle, Derek Semsick, Oracle Jason Vines, Oracle Drawn Cap, Oracle Ben Bandolo, Oracle Sean Gallagher, Oracle The Crew of Erebus, Oracle Puka G, Oracle Christopher Phillips, Oracle Guy Stewart, Oracle Buck Gregory, Oracle Bad Company, Oracle Spartacus, and Archmaster Andrew Edelstein, Archmaster Berto, Archmaster Brad O' the Blue, Archmaster Dan Sevenson, Archmaster Jeff Waugh, Archmaster Leroy Bryce, Archmaster Morgan Aaron, Archmaster Simon Strand, and Archmaster Wolf Larison. And also thanks to Drunk Dens, Jade Barrett, Maurice Hopkins, James B., Jervis Johnson, EBG, George Laura, Will Vincent, Shartan, Kevin Fitzpatrick, Lauren Jensen, and Rebecca Poole. But wait, there's more. There's Tyler Bryan, Jason Duncan, Sev Nessus, Bubba the Pale One, Henry Kraft, Eric Schwenke, Starfish, Ambiversion, Ryan Stray, Lols, and Stuff. Let me take a breath because there's a lot of names here. Kathleen Halperin, Kilreek, Alexia, Patrick McNamara, Blaze Hebert, Rachel Grace, Daniel Scribner, Ricardo, Robert H., Rob H., Ryan, and Alex. Okay, another deep breath. Nikita Klemenov, Leslie Weatherstone, Matthew Prohl, Anders S., Bryce Perry, Michael Parker, Jeremy Z., Melissa Krause, Ian Robertson, Curtis Hendricks, The Real Nito, Sig, Manel Kenos, Darren Hennessy, Eli Levinger. All right, I'm bringing in for the home stretch, folks, David Rowe, Jason Kennedy, Samuel Tobin, DeBarrow, Jenna F., Chris Kenner, Gray Trillick H., Daniel Cuppen, Ryan Kendi, Ia Bull, and Stepha Carton. If you'd like to hitch your wagon to Mage the Podcast and become one of our executive producers, we'd be mighty grateful. It helps us keep rustling up episodes like this one and keeps the campfire stories going strong. Plus, you get a seat at our very own council, where we chew the fat about what's coming down the trail. Just mosey on over to that link in the show notes and get started at magethepodcast.com. All right, go light a candle, draw a circle, or take a nice deep breath. Until next time, stay weird, stay wise, and don't forget, reality is negotiable.
Thank everyone for listening. Till next time, truth until paradox, baby.